It's unlikely that they would have been able to go, actually the optical fibre that's buried in your street that brings your Wi-Fi to your door is actually the thing that can make the drip irrigation network work better and save water, which is pretty pertinent given the heat waves that we've now got.
So I'm here at Cambridge Consultants, which is part of Capgemini here in Cambridge, and I'm with Neil Mottram, who is the VP of Energy and Agritech. So Neil, lovely to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for having me.
So just for people who haven't come across Cambridge Consultants before, obviously we've worked together for nearly a decade now, but what is Cambridge Consultants? What do you do and who do you work with?
I think I'd start off by saying we are perhaps a confusingly named entity because we're not consultants in the traditional sense. We're here to commercialise technology. And we do that from the very small consumer goods that you'll find in different toy shops all the way to satellites that are up in space. And we do that in multiple industries with lots of different disciplines, both in this building here in Cambridge, but also around the globe in Boston, Singapore and Tokyo.
Okay, and you're really about bridging that gap, aren't you, between sort of high-end innovation at maybe proof of concept and getting it into a way that it just sort of works for consumers.
Exactly. So in every industry, and AgTech's a good example of this, we've got lots of really interesting innovation that happens in academia and other research institutes. There's a big gap between that and what growers can actually use in a field or a glasshouse. And we're here to bridge that gap. Missing middle is sometimes the phrase used.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of experience. I always think one of the sort of the secret ingredients of Cambridge Consultants is your multidisciplinarity, and it's not secret, that's one of your USPs. But have you got any kind of examples where thinking from other sectors has been applied to projects you've been doing in agri-food tech?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and one of the reasons we interact with the clients in the way that we do is we're kind of bringing knowledge from other industries that they might not be aware of and helping it jump the fence, so to speak, and showing how it's relevant to them. So you can think of independent industries as being in their own silos, and AgTech's a good example of that. It absolutely knows its own industry inside out, but it increasingly now overlaps into the world of energy, into the world of telecommunications, into the world of infrastructure. And all of those industries don't really interact that well today. So we're trying to be the glue that brings those silos together into a system, because it needs to be a system if we're all going to kind of work together in the future digital infrastructure.
Sure. And I think one of the sort of the background to this conversation is some of the sort of cross-sector learnings, and we'll come on to funding in a minute. But are there any examples of where you've seen that sort of magic of the multidisciplinarity between those different sectors coming through? Have you applied different thinking into AgTech maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think of a project we can talk about openly with Netafim, so one of the world's premier irrigation companies. We've helped them come up with an irrigation system that helps growers reduce the amount of water that they use by about 20%, but still promotes growth by an additional 20% by taking technologies that have been used in oil and gas and telecommunications with very clever optical fibers to be able to communicate to lots of different valves in a drip irrigation network in a really efficient way, so you can turn different valves off and on as you need.
Nice.
And that, if that was purely done in an academic world or purely done from a company that knows just AgTech, it's unlikely that they would have been able to go, actually the optical fibre that's buried in your street that brings your Wi-Fi to your door is actually the thing that can make your drip irrigation network work better and save water, which is pretty pertinent given the heat waves that we've now got. That's a really good example of where we kind of bring that cross-industry expertise as well as cross-disciplinary expertise.
Excellent. And let's talk about energy, because that's the other thing that makes you skip to work in the morning, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Now, energy is a really pertinent topic in agri-food, not least there have been growers that have had to almost literally turn the lights off because of the costs of energy, particularly if you're in protected production. So how has your experience and knowledge of the energy sector inspired thinking into agri-tech and agriculture?
It's a really interesting space. So I think of agri-food and energy as being similar in that they're critical infrastructure, in that we all need to eat, we all need energy. And in the energy world, we've had a system that, up until 20, 30 years ago was deliberately public sector owned and was then privatized. And it's a sector that, by and large, for 100 years has just done the same thing, particularly from an electricity point of view. You generate electricity centrally and you consume it in houses and businesses and farms distributed all over the country. And what governments have recognized is, as policy requires more electrification of transport and heating, if that industry was just left to its own devices, it would do the same thing that it's always done for 100 years, which is quite literally keep the lights on. But it wouldn't innovate and move at the pace that it needs to if we're going to suddenly pivot from hydrocarbons into more of an electrified society. So what the energy industry has in the UK is mechanisms to provide funding for innovation that helps that industry move with the times and be able to meet those different government targets. And in doing so, in theory, eventually become more self-sufficient in energy as a nation and bring our bills down. That's the long-term goal. There isn't the equivalent in the ag tech world today. Ag tech is very much more fragmented in terms of farms and ecosystem and so on, but it's critical national infrastructure. We all need to eat. So can there be a similar kind of structure in place that allows the really interesting innovation that happens at academic level and with SMEs today to actually scale into business as usual, so that growers can actually use it? And in doing so, some of those glasshouse owners, etc., might be able to reduce energy costs. Some of those growers who are struggling with water might be able to still grow crops. That's the part that needs a bit more of a top-down government change in how we fund and deliver innovation in ag tech.
Interesting. So let's make you Prime Minister for a day. You may or may not want that job, but if you were advising government on how that might work, what could the learnings from the energy sector bring across? Would that need to be some kind of centralised managed fund? Is it national? Is it subnational? How would that work?
Yeah. So the energy example in the UK is managed by the regulator, Ofgem.
Yep.
So slightly separate to government with DESNZ. But Ofgem kind of gets its funding centrally, and then it has ownership of a fund for innovation called the Strategic Innovation Fund, or SIF for short. And that runs in 5-year cycles. And the latest 5-year cycle started in April this year, and it will run until March 2031. Within that 5-year period, that fund has £500 million to spend on innovation.
Wow.
And it all comes through a tiny little bit of each of our energy bills. Really, really small amount. But because we all use energy, and there's a lot of people in the country, it actually mounts up pretty quickly. And within that 500 million fund, you then have a specific section of the fund that's just for commercialization of technologies that have got really close to being deployed, but just need a little bit extra nudge to get over the final hurdle. And I can't help but think that there's potentially something there that the ag world learn from, because it doesn't need to be very much on whatever it may be, overall shopping basket rather than a particular item. Because of the amount of groceries we all buy, that fund would become pretty big pretty quickly, and you really wouldn't notice the difference on your overall cost. How you manage and use that's an interesting government challenge, because there's no real equivalent to Ofgem in ag. There's DEFRA, which is DESNZ's equivalent. You probably need another body. But the funding mechanism would be a really interesting one to explore.
Wouldn't that be cool? So the Strategic Innovation Fund for Energy, that's national, because we obviously have the devolved nations in Scotland and Wales, and that everybody signed up to this, have they?
Absolutely everyone, because we all need energy, irrespective of which nation in the UK you live in. And so I would propose, if I'm Prime Minister for a day, we have the same thing in the ag world. You know, just because we've got devolved administrations in Cardiff and Edinburgh doesn't mean you eat differently in those countries. So the funding mechanism should be the same, and that's why it applies in energy, because it doesn't matter where you live or what political party you voted for, you still use energy. So it's done completely blanket across the nation.
And do you bid into this fund? Can universities bid in? Can a company like Cambridge Consultants bid in?
Yeah, and it's, as you can imagine, very structured and organised by Ofgem. So there's different stages to the funding. And the early stages are very much aimed at those academic research organisations and bringing something that's different to market. And as you move through what's called discovery to alpha to beta, the ability of larger organisations to come on board and be that transition from really interesting academic to something that UK can actually use, that becomes more viable. So it's deliberately set up that you can have academics, SMEs, and larger companies all engage at different steps in the process as it matures. That seems pretty sensible. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty good model to potentially copy.
Interesting. And does it need match funding? That's often the kicker for smaller business. Oh, even better.
No. So it's slightly. I mean, it has, as you can imagine, quite a lot of paperwork oversight.
Indeed.
Given that there's a regulator involved, but it's not the same as some other aspects of UKRI funding. It's got a little bit more practicality to it.
Sure. Now, being devil's advocate, there's always great concern about putting a penny on this or half a pence on that when it comes to foodstuffs. But in the UK, certainly now we don't have AHDB, the levy board, certainly funding research into horticulture and market intel into horticulture, so fruit, salad and field veg and roots. It's kind of a bit more tricky to get that. Would we need an incentive to get everybody across that value chain signed up to that? What did they do in energy? Did they just say, this is how it is, this is how it will be?
Yeah, that's where the differences between two markets might be a challenge. So if I go back to that SIF, as it's called, that Strategic Innovation Fund example, you generally have to have what's called a distribution network operator involved. So those are the companies that run the wires to your house. They don't do the big pylons, that's the transmission folks. So generally National Grid down here and a couple of other entities north of the border. Because those are essentially local monopolies, there's only 6 of them in the whole country, it's really consolidated, and therefore being able to kind of manage that is practical. Very different world in ag tech. So it definitely wouldn't be kind of fully like for like. Yeah. I'd love to throw the challenge at DEFRA and say, well, we've got similar importance to food as we do to energy, so why don't we give it the same importance when it comes to innovation and allow the innovators to bring stuff to market? Because I think in the 10 plus years I've been in ag tech, one of the frustrations I always hear, particularly from growers, is yes, there's lots of interesting technology and robotics and drones and so on, but I can't use it on my farm. It's not mature enough. It's not something that is practical or cost effective. Having the right funding mechanism so that you can get more commercial entities to support those academic institutions and those SMEs, that's potentially the way you bridge that gap.
Love it. Love it. And would you like to speculate on, what could be the size of the prize, do you think, for the UK and indeed internationally, if you're looking at export and trade activities?
I probably couldn't put a figure on it, but I would want to emphasise that it is UK. It is all the regions, and politics notwithstanding, something that promotes regional growth is a pretty hot topic at the moment. And from an energy perspective, where we generate energy and where we use it, slightly different, but we want to keep it uniform. And the same thing applies to agriculture, where we get our crops and our beef and our meats from, covers the whole of the country. Yep. So how can we make sure that the policy benefits the whole country and incentivizes that innovation? I can't put a figure on it, but it would benefit all the regions of the UK and not specific, dare I say, Oxford to Cambridge corridors that do get a lot of attention. It's something that benefits all.
Wow, love it. Well, we all talk to DEFRA a lot. We talk to DESNZ, Department for Energy and Net Zero, Energy Security and Net Zero, isn't it? And this sounds like also there's a lot of government departments that should be interested. So You heard it here first. Now, just before we close, can we just have a quick chat about quantum computing and resilience and security?
Yeah, so forgive me for going into a bit of technical detail here, but we mentioned that agri-food and energy, critical national infrastructure, and the National Cyber Security Centre has said to the people who operate critical national infrastructure, quantum compute, with all the possibilities and the threat that comes with that, is going to happen. Please have a plan in place by the end of 2028 for what you plan to do to make sure that quantum doesn't unlock all of your cryptography for various different things. So when I talk about a phrase called PQC, that is post-quantum cryptography. So how do you make sure that a bad actor who's got access to quantum doesn't just undo your bank account, but could potentially undo all the logistics of Tesco or Marks and Spencer's or stop John Deere's tractors working? So that National Cyber Security Centre said within next, what will that be, 2 years, for those operators, you need to have a plan for a plan. And then by 2035, you need to start implementing it. That's not a fear-based thing. That's just a practicality of making sure that the UK stays secure.
Sure.
And geopolitical environment at the moment is pretty unstable. So there's a real importance of making sure that we are secure from a quantum cyber threat perspective. We're working in the energy sector with NESO, they're the National Energy System Operator, to help them with their PQC threat tracker and then mitigate those threats. There's no equivalent to NESO in AgTech, but the entities that operate a lot of infrastructure in AgTech probably need to be aware of this and think, right, well, what am I going to do to make sure that, someone in certain parts of Eastern Europe can't bring down my infrastructure? So it might seem far off in terms of technology, but if the National Cyber Security Centre is saying it needs to be done in the next few years, we should probably take it pretty seriously in ag as much as we do in other parts of critical national infrastructure.
Indeed. So not to scare anybody, but to a heads up.
Yeah, just be prepared. Come up with a plan.
You're here to hold people's hand through coming up with the plan, tracking the risk and helping to mitigate.
Yeah.
Okay, heard it here first. Neil, great to chat to you. Thank you so much. Cambridge Consultants, your go-to partner to, what did you call it? The missing middle.
Missing middle, commercialising technology.
Commercialisation. Neil, great to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Melinda.